Okay, good morning everybody and welcome. Thank you for choosing to spend your time with us here this morning on the Y Sports Health and Inactivity webinar. My name is Yvonne Harrison. I'm going to be chairing the session today and linking our panellists seamlessly from one presentation to the next. I'm just going to give you a little bit of information now about how the webinar is going to run and then we'll get straight into the content. I think we've got over 300 people booked on today. We're just over half online at the moment, so people will join us throughout the next hour. We were due to be hosting as Y Sports, the Health and Inactivity Conference down in London at the Royal Society of Medicine today. Sadly, with the pandemic, we're not able to do that, and we've actually moved the conference back to November. November feels like a very long time away right now, and we've been listening to some of our delegates who've been telling us that actually you want to stay connected and you really feel it's important to have information, the latest thinking, and understand and work through some of the challenges that the sector is going to face as we move forward. So today's the start of a series of our webinars. You'll be able to join us in the coming weeks and months, which we're really excited about. So again, as we go through this, if you have any particular topics you're interested in hearing from people, please do let us know. We're going to be using the hashtag today, which is WSHA20Web. I'll say that again. That's WSHA20Web. So feel free to share the conversation on social media today. We've also got a chat option you'll see in the webinar section there on the right on my screen. Hopefully it's in the same place on yours. So you'll be able to ask questions throughout and we'll have a space for a Q&A as we progress through the presentations. So effectively what's going to happen, we have our three speakers representing Swim England, NHS England and Sport England. So thank you for them for joining us. They're going to have around 10 minutes each. They're going to show a series of slides and videos. As delegates to the webinar, you'll have access to all of those slides as PDFs beyond the webinar today. Once we've done that, we're going to be asking you some poll questions as we go through as well. So we want your input. Please keep it nice and interactive. And we're really going to be listening to what you're saying in those polls because we want the latest insight from you and what you're feeling and what you're experiencing within the sector as well. Our speakers are going to be talking about the here and now, the insight that they're picking up on the ground, but also really importantly, how they're planning and preparing for the future and what we need to do together to support people, particularly those who were inactive previously and just starting to move through on that journey. It's going to potentially be even more challenging for people. So how do we actually respond to that and how do we stay agile as a sector? We've got lots of different people from local authorities to leisure trusts, national governing bodies, charities, healthcare professionals, a real mix of people online with us today. So hopefully there's something for everybody. I think now more than ever, we really do need to stay in touch. We need to stay connected. And we need to prepare for the future. So today's a great start point for that. And I'm really looking forward to it, having spoken to our panellists prior to today. So without further ado, we'll get into that. I will be popping in and out as we go through the webinar just to make sure we're connecting everything together. First up, we've got Kenny Gibson. Kenny is the National Head of Safeguarding for NHS England and NHS Improvement. So no small task there, Kenny, at all. He's going to be actually really challenging us to think about not only the here and now, but the recovery of our physical and mental health beyond this pandemic and crisis. So, Kenny, I'm going to throw over to you. Your slides will come up and Rich will help you through that. And then, like I say, to everyone in the audience, if you've got any questions, please pop them in the chat section and I'll pick them up as we go through today. So, Kenny, over to you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. And thank you for inviting me on to deliver a 10-minute session on safeguarding, particularly related to activity and being active. First slide, please. Oh, first slide. Back. There we go. So, slide 2. Okay then, so safeguarding requires resilience, and part of what I need to explore with people on the call today is how resilience is being in the decline. Everyday resilience is being in decline because of our public health emergency. We have millions of families, millions of active people who are in survival mode at the moment because we've all been on home lockdown with our loving families for 6 weeks now and maybe another few weeks. And during that adversity, we go into survival mode, and some of our emotional symptoms and our stress symptoms boil over into what we are calling, in my world, pressure cooker households. So when people aren't out exercising and people aren't out living their normal lives, family tensions, relationship tensions boil over. And we can already see this. Did you know, for instance, in the first week of COVID lockdown, alcohol sales increased by 600 to 800%. 600 to 800% a rise in alcohol sales. Now that's an indicator to me that the adaptive techniques that people are using to come out of survival mode are not as healthy as they might do. And so part of what I'm going to explore with you is how safeguarding not only requires resilience, activity and healthy lifestyles, etc., but also conversations. We as a society have changed in lockdown, and we as a society need to change further and perhaps become more humane and become more aware of human rights. Next slide, please. Safeguarding comes in many lenses, and here you can see a list of the types of programs that we cover in contextual safeguarding. What do we mean by contextual safeguarding? It's child sexual abuse, it's safeguarding in the health and justice system, it's serious violence, it's county lines, it's gangs, it's exploitation, it's scams, it's coercion. It's missing persons, it's modern slavery, it's human trafficking, it's female genital mutilation, and yes, it is sexual abuse in sports clubs, born of that coercive control, and it is also about the dark web. The one thing I've learned, having worked in safeguarding for 38 years as a mental health nurse and midwife, is that each of us can do anything, but none of us can do everything. So we can each do something, but we can't do everything. And if you want more information about contextual safeguarding, there is a link there. Next slide, please. As we move into contextual safeguarding, it is important for sports facilities to think about the fact that it is not only about the person, but it's about the space and place. What we've learned is that you can remove as many children as you like from the stairwell or from the fast food outlet, but if you do not contextually safeguard that space or place, kids will continue to flock there as adults will continue to attract antisocial behaviour. So it's very important in the new world of safeguarding that space and place is protected, and we can do that through community safety partnerships or through the violence reduction units. So where we're seeing, as we come out of COVID into a more coming together, we do need to be cognizant of the fact that that may require us to safeguard space and place, as well as making a personal referral of abuse, neglect, exploitation or violence. Next slide, please. Obviously, serious violence and tackling exploitation is extraordinarily serious. And the government have brought out the serious violence strategy that will be the remit of violence reduction units to work. But we have to be very clear here. Serious violence is not simply about gangs stabbing each other or gangs stabbing victims. There you can see a full range of serious violence: domestic, knife crime, violence against women and girls, including female genital mutilation, modern slavery, forced marriage, honor-based abuse, sexual exploitation, and sexual violence and abuse. All of those are now to be referred to the violence reduction units. And if your organisation is looking to prevent abuse, neglect and violence against the people that you deal with, then those violence reduction units would like to hear your narrative, because they have £80 million a year to solve violence of all types. Next, please. Next slide, please. However, a lot of violence is around power and coercion, and it stems from the home. People, children learn it. It is a learned behaviour in the home. And here you can see the power and control wheel that used to be used. But part of what we must do in healthy relationships, and very much so in sports clubs and active groups, is should we not be educating and training and teaching our children, who are the adults of tomorrow, about healthier relationships? So my preferred option is, yes, to recognise power and control as a causative factor of domestic violence, but maybe if we step up to the mark and celebrate the healthier relationship wheel as well, that may actually be a better way to move forward, a more humane way to move forward. Let's accentuate the positives without profiling too much of the negatives. Next slide, please. But domestic violence has many lenses. It is about the victim, absolutely, and the perpetrator, but your groups and your membership also need to be aware that we have a duty to support the perpetrators. It is critical that we get into the mindset of what triggers a perpetrator, and so there's a national helpline there led by Respect, because if we don't tackle the perpetrator, we'll continue to have victims. And so understanding domestic abuse perpetrators is fundamental. Next slide, please. Sexual abuse and exploitation is still rife. And I just want to pause and read out these figures. At any one time in the UK, 100,000 of us are looking at child sexual abuse images at any one time on our computers. 100,000 of your friends, your families, your neighbourhoods, your communities are looking at this. And indeed, a more alarming statistic, 0.87% of ISPN internet searches have actually searched the phrase child porn. So we know that with the advent of Tinterweb or internet and chat rooms, etc., this is actually on the increase. And during COVID, this has doubled. So during COVID, with people in lockdown, child sexual exploitation on the web has actually increased twofold, particularly interfamilial sexual exploitation. Next slide, please. And so we must begin looking at child sexual abuse from the perpetrator's perspective. So many of you might be aware of Stop It Now. And Stop It Now is about trying to get people influenced by their internal inhibitors that you can see there as part of the perpetrator conditions and the grooming line. So if people now do search any type of child sexual abuse words, then Stop It Now will pop up that you're about to be reported to the internet police, and you're recommended to phone that phone number so that you don't go into the external inhibitors. So we're trying to support perpetrators, online perpetrators of child sexual abuse through the Stop It Now. Next phrase, next slide. However, it is on the increase. Many of you might be aware of county lines. County lines is where gangmasters give children as young as 10 rucksacks of about £2,000 worth of drugs to go and sell those drugs. It's called county lines because they tend to use trains. This is nothing to do with where the child lives, which is usually city. This is to do with the supply and demand in small villages and towns, where the affluent or the middle classes or recreational drug users are. There are various phases of county lines, not least of all the child abuse and exploitation in phase 2, where they're asked to do something really quite drastic and vile with a sibling, and then violence happens and they have no way out. So children as young as 10, 12 are being abused and exploited by gangmasters, and they end up in all sorts of debt burden and violence, etc. And some of them will be coming to your clubs, and some of them will be part of the communities you live in. And we must support you to extract these children from the grip of gangmasters. Next slide, please. Next slide. The other thing that is on the rise is fabricated injuries and illnesses. This used to be called Munchausen syndrome, and this is where predominantly young women tend to self-harm or have symptomology that is leading to them presenting it at A&E, usually for opioids or pain control or at times surgery. The alarming thing about this is they get a lot of mutual support on the social media, and so we have a deal of work to do in clubs and social media around trying to inspire children not to harm themselves and not to inflict injuries, etc. The surprising thing about fabricated injuries and illnesses for we as safeguarders is more than half of them, the small majority of them, have parents who are carers, clinicians, or safeguarders themselves. So we need to explore that a bit further. And if you do have people in your clubs or in your groups who are self-injuring, then they do need to be supportively referred to a fabricated injuries and illness services, and there are many around. Next point, please. Obviously, a large part of safeguarding is data sharing. And from safeguarding point of view, if you have any concerns about a person in your group, then you do have the right to share that data, even without their consent. And that is a Section 251 data sharing exemption. If someone's life is at risk, then we can and we should share data with the NHS, through the NHS, and with our colleagues in community safety. So never let anyone tell you that you cannot share data for the purposes of safeguarding a citizen who comes to your clubs or your groups or as part of the NHS. And remember, no one has ever been sacked or disciplined for sharing data if it is for saving that person's life. Next slide, please. Obviously, all this sharing of data means there'll be targeted intelligent interventions, intelligent-led interventions, and some of these will be party to your groups as you move forward. So maybe in the new world, the new normal for active groups and sports groups, we should be looking at reducing vulnerability. What type of intelligence do you need? Local intelligence do you need to tell you how safeguarded your area is, or to tell you how much sexual exploitation or gangs are working there, or the mental health prevalence in your area. All these data sets are available to you and with you if you want to do that. So what can we do with these data intelligence sets? Next slide. We can begin a new science, a new modernity. Contextual safeguarding is not about child protection. It is about think family. So what are the vulnerability factors during COVID that means pressure cooker households? All sorts of pinches and punches are happening. So think family is a new system and science that we want to position. Next slide, please. Another new theory is adverse childhood experiences, and you can see here that certain things that happen in our household have childhood have a profound effect on us, and much of exercise and groups can actually overturn this, and this is what we call shit life syndrome, that activity and groups and peer support can actually overturn a shit life syndrome so that they can actually be healthier young people and sorted adults, and adults who can cope with their own adverse childhood experiences. Next slide. The other thing that we want to be clear on is trauma-informed practice. Find out what happened to the person. Don't look on this person with the problems, or look on this person with the problems rather than a patient with an illness is our mantra in the NHS. So begin exploring with them what happened to them and their journey into safeguarding and out of the other side of safeguarding. Next slide. And obviously part of exercise and activity is what the strength-based approach it brings in terms of environmental strengths and areas of their life, activities of living, etc., and what matters to them. If we empower people through exercise and activity, we can and we will overturn some of the challenges they've faced as children and young people. Next slide. Obviously, you're not going to be able to do everything. So what could you do when you're back in your groups and your networks or as part of your digital enablement? Well, first of all, you've got to be curious and ask the right questions. What happened to you? What matters to you? How can we help you thrive? Are really important safeguarding questions. You must listen to those. You must believe what's being said, and you must find something pragmatic to do. And part of what we're trying to do, including this session, is create a social movement that safeguarding is not child protection. It can actually bring benefits to those type of children and young people and adults impacted by horrible situations. Next slide. Final slide is, if you do want to find more, there's a QR code there that gives you the NHS Safeguarding app. It is totally free, it is totally kept up to date and contains all and more of what we've just gone through. There's an organisation called Multi-Agency App, which is all about safeguarding resources, and there's over 400 trusted resources on a single keyring. And also we've set up a community of practice approach that you can access via nhs.net. So these systems and services are set up for you, because you'll never know as much as you need to know at that moment when you need to think about safeguarding in all the lenses that I just described.
Thank you, Kenny. Very, very informative. Some absolutely frightening statistics, actually. Very scary. And I think we see the heightening, as you illustrated, of situations within the home. Not everybody has a safe home environment. No. I was talking to an assistant head teacher friend of mine, and she was talking about, you know, some of the packs that are being delivered, hand delivered to people, and people being allowed onto an estate or not as a teacher. Like, it's some really scary stuff. I think at this moment in time, we already see a lot of inequality in society, and I think there's a real worry and concern and reality that the widening of inequalities is going to become even more stark. I absolutely love the healthy relationships model, actually, and I think as a sector, sport and physical activity, we've been moving much more to a strength-based, asset-based approach in our communities, and I liked that sort of emphasis. So I think there's definitely something that we can take from that. And I also think it was very encouraging to see, you know, the impact that physical activity and sport can have to support people. And as you were talking, there were 2 poll questions that I noticed that was asked. And one in particular was around whether physical activity is currently helping people in terms of their mental well-being. And over 95% of people on the webinar now said that it was. It's no surprise to me, because it's literally getting me through. I'm not going to lie. It's massively important to me in my life generally, but actually at the moment, I found it really, really important. It just gives me that time, you know, whether you're homeschooling your children, you're trying to work, you're trying to, you know, make tea, do all the things in a normal situation. The pressure is a lot anyway. So that's really encouraging and not surprising. And I'm sure as Suzanne comes into the conversation, you know, Sport England have done some research recently. And again, that trend has absolutely been supported, but 95% is huge. And we should utilise that. The other poll that was asked, which is very relevant, was around whether the fact of COVID-19 is going to change the way that people consume physical activity in the future. And again, over 90% of people in the webinar felt that it absolutely is. So it's very relevant now to consider all the things that you've talked about, all the different ways of questioning and supporting people, and that wider safeguarding aspect as we move forward into how do we as a sector support people to be active, knowing how important it is just to us, and we're probably all converted anyway in the webinar, but it's so important to us what it's going to do for other people. So moving nicely on now, actually, to introduce our next speaker. That's Suzanne Gardner. She's the National Partnership Lead for Health and Inactivity for Sport England. And speaking to Suzanne earlier this week, she was talking about some of the latest data and insight that Sport England have, and also some of the campaign work. I'm sure you'll have seen some of the fantastic adverts on our TV at the moment, really motivating, and a wide range of people showing the fun and the impact and the benefit of physical activity. So Suzanne, I will open to you. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to everybody down the line today. Doing these webinars is quite a new experience for me, so I hope I can do all of the work that's been happening with our partners justice. Obviously, when this session was originally discussed, we were in a pre-COVID-19 world, really, and it's fair to say that the slide set has changed quite a bit as a result of the current situation we find ourselves in. So I'm going to look to capture some of the original work that we were doing on decreasing inactivity and with our health partners, and to explore a little bit the effects that the COVID-19 response has had on that, and also to delve into some of what we're finding and some of the support work that has been happening at Sport England with our partners, and looking at how we are trying to support, I guess, what comes next as well. So it's going to be a bit of a whistle-stop tour, but I'm going to try to impart some of the key messages, and hopefully you'll find some of them interesting. I do warn you that I will utilise some notes just to keep me on track. Those of you that know me know that I could talk forever on a lot of these topics. Next slide, please. So when we launched the Towards an Active Nation strategy a few years back, we made a number of commitments to tackle inactivity, in part because of the stark statistic that is shown in the headline of this slide. And hopefully some of you would have seen our Active Lives data release last week, which showed some good news, which is that we have been seeing a fall over time in the adult population who are reporting being inactive. And at the same time, we also, the data release also highlighted record highs in the activity levels that we were seeing as a nation pre-COVID-19. And this really suggests that all of the hard work of the partners that we're working with across a variety of different sectors is making a positive difference in the lives of our communities. And whilst this research showed that the decrease in inactivity was being driven by women, and we know that there are very particular inequalities that exist for certain parts of the population, the inactivity increases were being driven by some increases in older people, people with disabilities, and people with long-term conditions who were meeting the government or the Chief Medical Officer guidelines of 150 minutes of moderate physical activity in a week. But the inequalities still exist, and they're likely to be exacerbated by the current pandemic. And we'll be looking into that in a bit more data in a few more of the slides. But the data really highlights that you are far more likely to be inactive if you are older, if you have a disability, if you have a long-term condition, or if you're from a lower socioeconomic group, and that they are disproportionately impacted by the barriers to physical activity that exist at present. Next slide, please. Now, having looked at the delegate list, I know that the majority of people on the line are really well versed in the health and wellbeing benefits of physical activity. We had the updated Chief Medical Officer guidelines released last September, and are being communicated really well across a range of partners. And so this slide kind of highlights a lot of what we already know. But some of the interesting things is some of the statements that have been made by well-known medics and by our Chief Medical Officer during the COVID-19 response. And we know that the evidence base for physical activity's role in people's risk or their potential outcomes of or from COVID-19 is really limited at this early stage of kind of the knowledge around the pandemic. But it speaks volumes that physical activity is one of the few reasons that we are allowed to leave our homes. And it's been giving a much greater prominence to physical activity, I think, in the general public's consciousness. And there's a lot of recognition for the role that it's playing in supporting our mental health and wellbeing and our resilience. And this is particularly, I think, in light of not just this lockdown period that we're in, but also the potential waves of what we're going to see in our population's health and well-being as a result of what's been happening during the pandemic. So there is there's a recognition that mental health is likely to be significantly affected, not just for those frontline workers, but for all of us who may be going through bereavement, who are suffering stress and anxiety, who are fearful of what's been happening and where the potential outcomes may lie and things like that. And also recognising the role that physical activity plays in decreasing the risk of long-term conditions. And we know that there's been, some vital services have been paused for people with long-term conditions, and perhaps people are seeking diagnosis less. And there's been a lot of news reports on that. So physical activity is really important in this time, and just wanted to highlight some of that.
Hello, I'm just checking. Can anybody hear me, or is it just Suzanne that's lost?
I can hear you.
Ah, okay.
Is that better? Can you hear me again?
Yes.
Okay, I don't know what happened, but the main thing
We've
is
lost you for the last couple of slides, Suzanne.
Oh no! Oh, that's not good.
Sorry. Maybe go back.
Yeah, do you want to go back a slide?
I think if you go back 2 or 3 slides, that's yeah.
To the right important one.
We heard this one, but then beyond that, I don't think we did.
Okay, so if you move on one slide, Richard, to the COVID-19 response, I'll just run through that again if that's okay. Sorry, apologies, I don't know what's happened. So I apologise. I will start this slide again. So we suspected that the restrictions were likely to be impacting on physical activity levels during this time. And so to support us and partners in understanding what's really happening, we have commissioned a weekly survey of 2,000 people across the population to help us better understand the true impacts that are happening in our communities of the lockdown. And unsurprisingly, what we've seen is a massive disruption in physical activity behaviours. The week one results showed that 33% of adults and 29% of children did more, and 39% of adults and 37% of children did less physical activity as a result of the restrictions and the lockdowns to protect the population and protect the NHS. And we've now got 3 weeks of data back, and although that gap is narrowing, so we're now seeing more people coming through. And yeah, sorry, I've just seen a message saying it's gone again. Hopefully it's come back. We are seeing a decrease in less people reporting physical activity. The difficult thing with this is that inequalities are still existing and are likely to really exacerbate what is happening. So we're at a significant risk of health inequalities widening in the longer term. People on low incomes, people living alone, and people who are self-isolating due to COVID-19 are all finding it harder than normal to be active during this outbreak. We've also seen a dip in women's activity levels, with fewer of them achieving the 5x30. And males are far more likely to be exercising than women at the moment. We're also seeing an increase in physical activity outside the home when we compare week 1 to week 3. So perhaps suggesting that people are starting to feel more comfortable with the guidance and about how to do what they want to do kind of safely within the outside. However, the challenge, I guess, for all of us is that those who drove the increase in physical activity that we talked about on the previous slide in the Active Life survey are being hardest hit, according to this insight. And we really need to start thinking about how we're going to support those individuals to come back to physical activity in a way that meets their needs. And that's likely to include COVID-19 as a unique barrier in its own right, and the fear and the safety concerns that people will have, particularly if they have been in kind of a period of shielding and as they start to emerge from that.
Sorry, your sound has gone again. I'm not sure if mine is okay. I'm just...
Yours is okay.
Is that okay? Is it back
right,
again?
We're back. I don't know why I seem to
this is weird.
Okay.
Richard, do you mind moving back one slide? Sorry. Oh, okay, don't worry. Keep going to the next one. I originally was looking at talking through kind of a huge number of programs of work that we're involved in, but I kind of decided to change tact a little bit, because the nature of who we work with means that a lot of the audiences, the partners that we're working with, are supporting are far more vulnerable to COVID-19 and are more likely to be shielding and isolating. Or we have a whole program of work on moving healthcare professionals, which at the moment is paused to allow the NHS to really focus on its COVID-19 response. Although there are messaging and there is support for healthcare professionals who want to talk about physical activity at this time. But what I really wanted to kind of show you was that while some of the programs of work may seem a little siloed, actually what we're really looking at doing is activating system change, and to really look at how we create and support that across a range of different partners, how we stimulate demand. So what insight do we have? What do we need to know? How do we support partners around that? And also testing and learning. And this slide really gives an example of how different pieces of work kind of start to make up a big jigsaw puzzle and are interlinked to try to remove some of those barriers, to unblock the things that aren't working across systems. And this is just an example of that. So you can see here highlighted about kind of how the We're Undefeatable campaign is working, kind of to increase that demand through the health charities and the trust that people have with them. We then have a lot of work around supporting healthcare professionals to have quality conversations around physical activity. There's a lot of work about how physical activity gets embedded into the social prescribing system, and actually then how we support the physical activity workforce to have the right skill set and expertise and experience and information that they need to really support people who are inactive and potentially who have long-term conditions to move into activity. We're continuing to work with our partners as we move through the phases of the government's response to the pandemic, and we'll continue to do that. But we recognise that for a number of our partners, such as the health charities, they've had an increased uptake of their support lines. They've pivoted what they're doing to support their members and their audiences. Our active ageing projects have been supporting people to remain connected and offering support such as shopping and medication pickups at this time, and also providing a lot of dedicated support around how to stay active, providing activity sheets, weekly phone calls, and those kind of things. Next slide, please. Hopefully, one of the key things that you will have seen recently is our Join the Movement campaign, and thank you to all of you who have been promoting it and working with us to do this. Hopefully you will have seen the advert that went live on Monday of this week with the Fatboy Slim track, which always manages to grab my attention in the middle of programs and everything else that I'm doing. But this campaign is constantly evolving and developing with online and social media content. So please access the partner resources and join us in helping to support the nation to stay active. The campaign isn't just whilst we're in the existing lockdown. We're also going to be focusing on the transition out of lockdown, and also as sport and activity starts to return to normal. And we're using all of our insight to inform these approaches. So not just the statistics and things like that I mentioned, but also all of our conversations with you as our partners, and all of the and kind of the wider insight about what's going on in the world. So the things that Kenny was talking about are kind of critical to understanding that wider context of people's lives and how we can best support. Can we move to the next slide, please? Could we have the next slide, please? Thank you. We're Undefeatable is also back on air. Hopefully you will have heard of the campaign previously. So it's a campaign led by the 15 health and social care charities with support from ourselves. And this time the advert is focused very much on being active in gardens and indoors in recognition of the shielding and self-isolating needs of many of the audiences that we are looking to talk to. And it really does complement Join the Movement and is helping us and partners to reduce the inequalities that we are really starting to see having an impact through lockdown. We're planning for a further burst of the campaign in the summer, so kind of late June, early July, and we've got a webinar next week. So I'd really encourage you to sign up to that if you want to find out more about our plans for that, and also to hear some of our latest insight. And as I said, we're doing a lot of testing and learning work with that audience, particularly around the COVID-19 responses that are happening in the lockdown and the shielding and the isolating, and it really is a unique barrier, and there are some genuine fears there, and working very hard to understand how we can work to support people through that and to move them back into activities that perhaps they loved prior to the pandemic. If we could move to the next slide, please. Thank you. Part of our activation work on We're Undefeatable doesn't just focus on the campaign itself. It also looks at how do we support the sectors to partner, and how do we create system change that better supports people with long-term conditions to get active. And one of the pieces of work that we have been supporting with Public Health England is some work being led by the National Centre for Sport and Exercise Medicine, which is a national online conversation about how we make it easier for people to be active with a health condition. And this conversation is going to be open till the 22nd of May. We've recently extended it. This work was developed and started just before we went into lockdown, and as a result we haven't been actively promoting it because we felt that while partners were responding to the lockdown and looking at how they can survive the lockdown, it would be inappropriate. But the conversation's been running in the background, and we've had around 200 people taking part so far, being able to put their ideas forward and to vote on kind of what people are saying, and all of this information will be brought together to develop new insight and recommendations to those who are providing and designing and commissioning physical activity services for people with long-term conditions. And people with long-term conditions themselves are also being encouraged to get involved in the conversation. If you would like to be involved, please do register, please do get involved. And if you feel that now isn't the right time to be inputting because of the situation we're in, there will be further opportunities later on in the year to input into a similar online conversation. But hopefully some of you will take a look at it after this presentation. If we could move on to my last slide, please. Thank you. I thought this would be a good opportunity just to talk about some of the key communications that Sport England has had as an organisation, and recognising really that we have pivoted our focus very much to how we can support the physical activity sports sector and our partners to come through this crisis and to be in a position to thrive again. Really paraphrasing Tim Hollingsworth's words there at the bottom of the slide. We spent an initial few weeks understanding the challenges and needs of partners and looking at how we could best respond to that, really. I'm sure you would have been involved in conversations with a number of people across Sport England about this, but really trying to understand about what delivery pausing would mean, what was happening around the furloughing of staff, how were you pivoting delivery? How were you meeting the needs of your audiences? And what were the increased demands that some people may have been seeing? And as a result, we announced a £195 million support package for the sector a couple of weeks ago. Some elements of that are still being worked up. Some bits you may have already spoken to people about, but I wanted to focus the attention just at the end of my presentation on the Community Emergency Fund. So we announced today that we've supported more than 2,000 organisations through the fund already and have allocated 8 million of the 10 million. And this is really about those frontline organisations, so the sports clubs and the voluntary and community sector organisations and charitable trusts that are the bread and butter of keeping our nation active, and supporting them during this initial financial hardship. So I really would recommend that if you are supporting any of those organisations or you come from one of those organisations yourself, please do take a look on our website and make sure that you're taking a look at that funding if you think it can be of help. I promised you a whistle-stop tour. Hopefully you found some of it interesting, and I look forward to looking at the questions in a moment.
Lovely. Thank you very much indeed, Suzanne. Really interesting. Some very interesting stats and some great questions emerging from these. Just for everybody in the webinar, if we don't get to your questions live, we certainly will come back and make sure that they're answered. Suzanne, people were asking for links to the other webinar that you're doing, to the consultation. So maybe that's something you can share those links in the question part, or we can certainly put them out to delegates. I
can slot them in there now, and perhaps we can send them round.
Lovely, thank you. I think two key things for me. There is an absolute need around engaging people back and supporting people to become active. There were some questions around particularly a high proportion of people from BAME communities with COVID-19. And also when you look at the stats in terms of ethnicity and people participating in sport or not, that's already a challenge. So, you know, the people are certainly interested in how we support that community, or those communities in particular, to come back through this. I think the other thing for me around, and it came from what you were saying, was around the fear and the perceptions of safety moving forward as we start to open up more and start to try and reintroduce or phase people back into physical activity. Those fears will be very, very real, and perception is the reality, isn't it? So I think there's a challenge to us as a sector to really consider our messaging and how collectively we can support and encourage people and show them that it is safe, you know, so I think that's something for us. I'm just conscious of time, so rather than take answers to the questions now, I'm just going to park them and introduce our final speaker, who is Elaine Mcnish, who's the Head of Health and Wellbeing at Swim England. And I'm sure, you know, people are sitting at home dreaming of holidays, dreaming of a swimming pool when the weather was so beautiful. We've been blessed with incredible weather. We managed to get our paddling pool out for a little bit. The kids were quite happy, but it's not the same. But actually the effects of water on people's well-being, particularly people who perhaps can't exercise in other ways, was massive. I hadn't realised how much until we spoke earlier this week. So Elaine, I'll throw open to you. Keep the questions coming, guys, and keep answering those polls, and we'll get to what we can as quickly as we can. So Elaine, for you. Thanks,
hello, good morning. It's great to be able to speak to so many people. Thank you for joining us today. As you can imagine, swimming is a bit challenging at the moment, although I have seen some very innovative ways of people practicing their strokes on dining room tables. attaching their legs to paddling pools so that they can't move, so that they can swim. So there's obviously still a wish to go swimming, even though it's a bit challenging to do so at the moment. So I'm going to talk a little bit this morning about the Water Wellbeing Programme, which we've been working on probably for the past 2-3 years. And I'm just going to share a little bit around that. The focus of the Water Wellbeing Programme is really supporting people with long-term conditions and impairments into the water. So I'm going to talk a little bit about where it came from, how it's been developed, and then I'm going to talk a wee bit about some of the implications around the COVID-19 virus on swimming potentially, and let you see a nice little video clip at the end that sort of shows you some of the work that's going on and some of the evidence around the value of swimming. Next slide, please. So the work that we've started in Swim England, well, probably started really with this piece of work, which was about 3 years ago. We commissioned an evidence review around the benefits of swimming. And when I use the term swimming, I also include wider aquatic activity, so exercise within the water. And that was quite a robust evidence review. It looked at it from the perspective of individuals' well-being, society, public health, etc. And it's available for you to take a look at. There is a shorter version for those that want to have a look at that, because the document itself is 158 pages long, so it's quite a big document. But one of the key things that really hit home for us was the water being the really, really great environment for people to exercise. People have already alluded to that this morning. Essentially, we are hearing from many of the participants in our programme that they struggle to be active on dry land because they have joint problems, or they're overweight, they overheat, they feel pain, and the water is a fantastic place for them to be active. And most people, when they think of swimming, think of it as aerobic activity, and they don't think of the other elements that can be developed. And we know that you can work on balance. For example, just standing in the water can be quite a challenge to balance people, but it also feels safe for people who are at risk of falls, because obviously they're not going to hurt themselves if they do fall. Strength, we've got foam dumbbells and a variety of ways of using the water to create resistance. So there's all sorts of areas that we can work on that often people forget about. Next slide, please. So when we started looking at this, we wanted to create something that would be attractive and supportive for people with long-term conditions, so we could capitalize on those benefits. And we'd done quite a lot of insight, and we'd created what we call our 3 frontier model. Now, it's compulsory that I put this into every presentation, so my boss gets the royalties for this. So here it is. The frontier model really took the insight, and the insight told us that many of the barriers that people felt and some of the drivers for swimming really were not just about the opportunity, which we would class as frontier 3. So is there an offer for me? It was also the whole customer journey to the pool. So things like, do I know what's right for me? Am I going to be greeted by a receptionist who understands my needs? Are the staff trained to understand and be empathetic about my needs? Is the environment such that I can manage to navigate around it? And even things like, is the marketing right for me? So Frontier 1 covers everything that happens before you even get to the pool. So it's the marketing, the transport, and so forth. 2 is what happens when you get there. That's around the staff training, the environment, managing locker systems. I don't know about any of you. I struggle with locker systems because they're all different wherever you go. But can you imagine doing that if you had dementia, or if you have other forms of cognitive impairment? It is a challenge. And then the final area, as I mentioned, is the offer right? So we know that from research that's been done that for people who are inactive, it doesn't take much to turn them off. So if they rocked up and they couldn't work out how to use the car parking system, for example, they may go, well, I've tried that, I'm off. Or if they've had a poor customer service experience, again, that is likely to turn them off. So it's really vital that when we think about any programs for anyone, never mind people with health conditions, and we are trying to target the most inactive people here, that we get the full customer experience right. Next slide, please. So hence we developed the Water Wellbeing Programme, and it kind of fell out of some work we've been doing around dementia-friendly swimming, because somebody sort of said to us, like, if you get it right for dementia, you probably get it right for a lot of people. And the key words I want to talk about in this slide is the whole facility approach, which I've mentioned earlier, but also sustainability. I won't like to share how long I've been involved in health and well-being and physical activity. Let's put it this way: I've probably been through about 20 different government strategies, but one of the things that I've also been through is that when the funding runs out after 3 years, things stop. And what we wanted to do was to try and show that it is a sustainable way of working. You attract more people to the pool. There is an income stream to be developed from some of these people as well, so that things don't vanish in 3 years' time. And one of the things that we're really looking about this is trying to understand the business benefits alongside the health and well-being benefits of delivering this model. Next slide, please. And this is what it looks like. It has a number of components, and the team, some of who I notice are on this webinar today, so I'll let them put some comments in the chat box if they wish. The team goes out and they meet with each of the sites, and the actual delivery will depend on what's already going on at site. It's not for us to dictate how that happens, but there are some core components that are part of this. So the first thing the team will do is have a chat with the sites, understand what they've already got going. So some of them may have exercise referral schemes, some of them may do swimming sessions for people with disabilities. So there's a range of activities already happening. We'll then arrange and work with them on an action plan that will look at the components that they want to work at and put in place a timetable for that to be delivered. We've developed inclusive customer service training. Now, we were doing that face-to-face, but just before lockdown, we'd worked with the Activity Alliance to update their online version of that, and that is now available. And that's been updated in a number of ways. The technology is far more inclusive now, which is great. So it's great for people with a number of different impairments, such as visual and audio ones. And secondly, we added in more information around the water, but we also added in lots of information around supporting people with long-term health conditions, because that training had been quite disability focused. So that's now available for our sites. The other thing that people really value is we provide or undertake, depending on what they want to do, an environmental audit. So that's going around the pool and the whole site and asking a series of questions about how inclusive that site is. Now, what we find from that is often it doesn't take massive investment to make a place more inclusive. So it can be very simple things like getting the signposting right, providing information about how the lockers work, making sure that accessible toilets are not full of cleaning fluids is another one. So there's lots of things that can be done that don't cost very much to make a site more accessible. And it's just things that people have probably just forgotten about, or maybe just aren't used to seeing the world through the eyes of a person with a long-term condition. And then we have the coloured boxes, we have got a range of options for sites that we work with. The pool pods, you'll see a picture of them in the video later on. They're basically a lift system to get people into the pool. What's great about pool pods is in some instances you can use them by yourself. It depends on the pool's health and safety screening on this one. And they're a far more dignified way of getting into the pool than hoists, because transfer to wheelchairs can be done in the changing rooms. If people need, the wheelchair can go onto the lift and into the water, and people can then get off themselves. So there's some great things going on there. And we've had some funding from London Marathon Charitable Trust to help put 20 pool pods actually across the UK. And the reason they wanted to work with us was that they didn't want it to be like Field of Dreams, you build it and they will come, because we know that doesn't work. What we needed was, I'm sorry, is somebody happened, have I frozen, or can you hear me okay? I've just noticed.
Can hear you, yes.
That's perfect. Sorry, I saw in the chat box somebody was having problems. So what we want to do is to ensure that the site environment is right, that the staff are trained, all the other bits that we've been talking about are in place, so that we will encourage and support people into the water. Exercise referrals still operating in across a number of sites, which is great, but often that is a dry land-based activity. So we developed a training called Aquatic Activity for Health, which is for level 3 exercise referral instructors, whatever they're being called at the moment, because they keep changing the qualifications, so that they are able to deliver a tailored aquatic offer in the water, obviously. It's great that we're seeing this, and a lot of the clients that we deal with say, I want to be in the water. It's the only place I can be active. So this is a fantastic opportunity for them. We've also developed sort of cards that they can use for circuits and various other things. Learn to swim is kind of the bread and butter of what we do as a governing body. But we recognise that often there's been a lot of energy put looking at children's learn to swim. We know that not so much is often happening in terms of adult learn to swim. And frequently, again, people with health conditions say to us, we're concerned that there may be an issue in terms of, are we going to make our condition worse? So it was really important that we worked with swim teachers. And we've been doing lots of online webinars. And if you go onto our health and wellbeing pages on our Swim England site, some of the recorded versions of that, we just recently had one for MS. And that's really to update our instructors and our teachers and help them understand the needs of people with different health conditions. We've also produced some advice sheets as well, which are available on that website for not just instructors, but for participants, coaches, etc., etc. And we are in the process of developing some training for CPD training for our swim teachers as well, which hopefully will be starting at the tail end of this year. And alongside that, we've produced a sort of handy guide for them for things to think about if they're teaching people with specific conditions. And then the final area that we've been working with is a company called Good Boost. So Good Boost is a social enterprise, and they use an artificial intelligence system to develop tailored exercise programs for individuals. Now, I think Ben said he was joining us today, but I haven't checked through the list. But Ben Wilkins is the CEO of Good Boost. The good thing about Good Boost, well, there's a number of things. Everyone gets their own individualized program, and that's on a tablet that sits by the water. At the moment, those sessions are facilitated by an instructor, so that they're there to help them with any of the exercises, but the exercises are actually on, animations of the exercises are actually on the system, so people can do that themselves. And we've worked with Ben to provide training and to pilot this in some of the pools. Ben currently is working on a land-based app, which he's looking at the moment, which will be available fairly soon. So whilst you can't get in the water, there will be another option for people. And again, you'll see that in work in the video at the end. And then thereafter, we provide ongoing support from the team, and we're really keen to collect as much data as possible, because we want to make the case that this is the right approach for people, and also make the case to the health service that we can support you in providing opportunities for some of your clients and patients. Next slide, please. So it's early days. When before the lockdown, we had 47 sites up and running. Unfortunately, obviously, because of the client group we're dealing with, some of the clients were beginning to self-isolate slightly earlier than other participants. But what we were finding was that we were attracting a high percentage of inactive people. About 58% of the people we were attracting were inactive. A third of the people, because we can get direct measures from Good Boosts, we know that a third of them were unable to walk 100 meters at registration, and 15% or no more than 10. So that is saying to me again that we are attracting the people to the water that would struggle on dry land. So we're really, really focusing in on those individuals. We've got some wonderful case studies. And as we know, when you get to this point in a program, when you start to see the benefits, it's fantastic to hear some people's stories. And we've heard people say they've reduced their medication, they've improved their sleep, improved mental well-being. We've had 3 people who've come back and said that they no longer needed joint replacement operations because their strength and flexibility has improved so well. So that's also great to hear. And then when we were doing some direct measures through the Good Boost system, we know, for example, there's been reductions in pain. The average pain has gone from sort of 35.5% reduction over not 4 weeks up to 41% by 24 weeks. Maximum pain reduction from around 56%. And self-reported function, that's where somebody does a measure themselves, chooses an area that they may struggle with and looks at how that improves. We've seen over 50% improvement in that, alongside 62% improvements in quality of life. So it's great to beginning to see some of these outcomes, and we're obviously keen, once the pools get back up and running, to continue to collect that data and to monitor and see how well people are doing from being able to be active in this way. Next slide. Thanks. So what I wanted to just finish off with is the impact that obviously COVID-19 has been having in terms of, and is likely to have in terms of pools. We know, as I said earlier, our clients self-isolated earlier, and they may be later coming out of isolation. Can't say the word. The likelihood, we feel, is because they say to us they struggle on dry land to be active, they are going to have more challenges being active. And if they are not active, their condition may worsen over this period of time. There are a lot of really good exercise apps out there, but not all of them are really useful for this group of people. And bearing in mind, one thing that this group of people tell us is that they are really scared that their condition might get worse and they will do the wrong thing. So they are very, very nervous about who and how and where they get their advice from. And then we know that there may be additional fears for this group of people coming out of lockdown, and there may be a loss of confidence if they haven't been in the water for a while. So these are things that we really need to think about in terms of the work that we do going forward, about trying to overcome some of those barriers and try to reassure people that we are open for business, it's safe for them, and we have an offer that's right for them. Operators, obviously hugely challenging times for them, loss of income, contract expectations, because we know that contracts over the past 20 years have moved from we'll pay you to run our pools to you give us an income from this. So there are still expectations around providing income. Finances are really tight. And it's not that you can just shut a pool and mothball it, you have to do it appropriately. So filters still have to run, temperatures needs to be maintained. It costs £1,500 per degree of temperature to raise a pool's temperature. So you can imagine the cost. And if you don't mothball the pools correctly, there's talk that it can cost up to £100,000 to reopen pools. So, you know, there's things that we need to do, and we've been doing some work with providing advice on that. we're not sure what the new normal will be. I'm not sure I like the term new normal, but it seems to be falling and being used a lot. We know that pools are a really safe place to be because the chemicals and all the treatment systems do kill the virus, but it's the getting from the changing rooms, and it's the social distancing and the additional hygiene that will be required. So we're spending a lot of time trying to understand how can you manage pools. So things like, I mean, I remember the days when I went to the Commonwealth Pool in Edinburgh, where I grew up, and you all had bands. So you had wristbands that you were allowed in for an hour. So maybe we will be going back to that to manage the number of people that come into pools and so forth. We will also have to think about how things are being taught, because the days of going into the pool for a while and holding and supporting people may be gone for a period of time. So the things like that we need to consider. And then for pools, it is going to be absolutely vital that they start bringing in an income stream as quickly as possible. Now, I'm hopeful that we will be doing enough work to convince them that people with long-term conditions are a valid and important income stream, and that they don't just initially concentrate on the cash cows, which are probably lanes and lessons as we used to call them. But we've got to do some work there to convince them of that, so that we don't lose out and we don't create even greater inequalities. And finally, the health service. And I think there is an opportunity for us as a sector to help out the health service. They are going to be catching up and trying to deal with massive waiting lists where therapy appointments have been cancelled. And they themselves are likely to be very battle fatigued. And we can support them and provide help to address some of this. Maybe looking at some of the waiting lists that are out there. Can we find a triage system and a signposting to the water as part of that? And also, can we provide an offer for NHS workers that will help support their mental health? Next slide, please. I think somebody's on. Would they mind muting, because I can hear some noise in the background, if you wouldn't mind. Thank you. So what we're doing as a governing body, we're working really closely with key agencies. And I think one of the things that has happened, which is great, is there has been far greater collaboration across the sector because of the virus. And I think this is making such a big difference. So there's lots of discussions going on with local government association, local authorities. We're in constant contact with operators to try and understand what's going on in their world and how we can help them. And UK Active have been very visible in lobbying government to try and ensure that incomes are secured for operators, and also how we can open pools safely as well. And we've been helping writing some of those key documents. Next slide, please. So some of the things we've been doing, so webinars on mothballing and how to reopen the pools post-lockdown, looking at all of those elements I described earlier, making the case, because we need to really, really value and make the case for our pools. We do not want to lose any of our pools as a result of this pandemic. So the value of swimming, and I'll show you a little bit about some of the work we've done previously on the value of swimming, and we will be looking at the value of pools as well as we go forward. I've had a lot of discussions with some of the key health bodies, charities, about how we provide support patients. So we've been talking a lot to Social Prescribing Academy. We do a lot of work with Versus Arthritis. We have partnerships with Black Swimming Association and with Level Water as well, and various other people. So we're trying to look at what the needs will be post-lockdown for individuals, ensuring that we can train and provide support for health professionals as well. We've got a piece of research that we're doing trying to understand what are the barriers for health professionals to not signpost people to the pools, and what things they would need to be reassured and comfortable to signpost their individuals to the pools. And then the last bit is really understanding the needs of the client. What will they need once post-lockdown? What will that look like for them? What do we need to reassure them? And we've been doing, I was speaking to Arthritis versus Arthritis yesterday, who've done quite a lot of work understanding the needs of this client group, and they're going to add some additional questions and to their client groups to try and help us understand what we might need to provide and reassure these individuals and provide in terms of the programming to help them come back to the pool. Next slide, please. So I just want to share with you our value of swimming. This is a film clip that was put together. You can get hold of the actual document. There was research undertaken to try and see if we could look at the different outcomes that came from the sports strategy and put a value of how swimming can contribute to this. So I'm not going to say any more. I'm going to ask Richard to run the video, and you can see for yourself some of the facts that came out from that research.
For generations, we've seen people of all ages benefit from swimming. But it's now clearer than ever that it's having a life-changing impact on society. Regular swimming can help to reduce long-term health conditions. In fact, regular swimming saves the NHS and our social care system more than £357 million each year, reducing the number of visits to GPs and reducing the dependence on care for a range of conditions. Regular physical activity, such as swimming, can reduce the occurrence of these conditions by as much as 40%.
I've managed to reduce the drugs I'm on and continue to do that, which is really good. The other thing is I can sleep. With a back condition, it's very different. At the end of the day, you get tired, the pain kicks in, and it's very difficult to get to sleep.
4.7 million adults in England enjoy the benefits of swimming regularly. Swimmers report feeling, on average, 6.4% healthier than non-swimmers. This is comparable to feeling 12 years younger.
I felt like I was an old lady before I was even 40. So I decided that I wanted to learn to swim. It's been absolutely life-changing for me.
Swimming supports positive changes to mental health. 1.4 million adults in Britain feel swimming has significantly reduced their anxiety or depression. Adult swimmers are, on average, more satisfied with life, are happier, and have a higher feeling that life is more worthwhile. Maria, who featured in Swim England's Love Swimming campaign, says swimming makes her feel physically stronger and emotionally lighter. Swimming boosts individual development. 2.5% of adult swimmers and 3.3% of young swimmers feel more confident that they will achieve their goals as opposed to non-swimmers. Swimming more than doubles the self-confidence of women and girls. Almost 2 million young people feel happier, healthier, and have a stronger sense of self-belief as a result of swimming. Swimming has a positive effect on social and community development. Swimmers are more likely to be socially connected and have more friends. They are 26.1% more likely to volunteer in general. And those who do volunteer spend about 7.5% more hours giving unpaid help. It's clear that swimming is valuable to people, to communities, and to society. Reducing the burden on the NHS, improving an individual's physical and mental well-being, and helping people to live longer, better, happier lives. Let's get the nation swimming.
Thank you. Sorry, I got jumped in too quickly. Thank you for that, Richard, for playing that. I don't know about you, but I sit there and I watch that clip and I'm going, oh, I still want to get back in the water. Richard, could you put up the final slide, because it's got my the contact details on it. Just to let you know, I will be furloughed from the end of this week, but if you can still send information, if you've got any queries, please send me any questions to our health inbox before the end of the week, and I'll try my best. But if not, someone will be picking up queries and we will get back in touch with you once the team's been unfurloughed and we know that pools are beginning to open again. So, but there's some information on where you can get some of the reports and the more information on the value of swimming that I talked to you about before a moment ago. But thank you again for your attention, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you ever so much, Elaine. Great presentation from you, and a really fantastic video. Lots of great feedback in the chat area there. I'm conscious we've run over, but equally we have a lot of people on the webinar. So if people are happy, I'm going to just pose a few questions to the panel. I don't propose keeping us too much longer because I'm conscious people might have other things that they need to get to, but we've got well over 100 people on, so it would be great, a great opportunity to get some questions. So if I can just ask our panelists to come back into live video, and just give me a thumbs up if you're okay for like the next 15 minutes or so. Is that all right? Wicked. Okay, super. Elaine, thank you. Loads of insight, and I think a lot of learning for other things in terms of the research you've done around that customer experience end to end. That's not just pools; it's every experience that anybody has. So do follow up with the reports and the research there, because I think that'd be really useful. So I've been kind of going through some great chat actually going on, and some real opportunities. I can already see people linking up for beyond this conversation, which is fantastic. And that's definitely what we're all about here at Y Sports, trying to create that online community and make sure the conversations can continue, whether that's through our conferences and accelerator or indeed the webinars. One point which I thought was really interesting, we've not really picked up on it, with COVID-19, and everything that's happening around that, we're already thinking about the participants and how we ensure people can come back to activity in a safe environment, and also feel able and that it's accessible. We've not really touched upon the workforce that support and deliver the activity, and I wonder if people have a view on, you know, the implications of this pandemic on the actual workforce they're ready to deliver. You know, have you seen, you know, from an operator point of view, or Suzanne, from the research that you've done, have you, you know, has that been kind of raised? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'm happy to respond to some of that. We're not sure what the workforce is going to look like when we come back, because our swimming teacher workforce are often slightly older, and some of them themselves may have health conditions. So there will need to be extra protection in place for those individuals, and some of them may choose not to come back for a while. So that has got quite big implications in terms of potential opportunities and training for new people coming in to maybe support some of those activities. So we are aware of that, and I think also the other element of this is the training that will be required for the workforce, and understanding how do you teach, how do you do what you do and do so well with slight constraints on what you are able to do, such as supporting people in the water and things like that.
Yeah. Okay, brilliant.
Sorry, I was going to say I would agree that I think there's a lot of work going on to try and understand what some of those implications might be and what support will be needed across the workforce to be able to support that kind of safe return, and also not just the safe return, I guess, but also how you build businesses and delivery back up where you've got audiences who are potentially quite nervous, and people who particularly if there's a phased kind of response to coming out of lockdown and things like that, quite what that will look like and what is able to restart quicker and things like that. So there's a lot of background planning happening with partners, but with so many unknowns built into that, that it's a real challenge. But one that is certainly being worked on. There's a lot of work going on with SIMSPA and UK Coaching and other kind of workforce colleagues at a Sport England level.
Yeah, you can imagine actually that translates into a webinar in itself. It's such a meaty subject, isn't it? And maybe that's something that we can look to facilitate in the coming weeks and months. There was a lot of discussion on the chat from both public and private sector around how they can support people, and whether, you know, it's the public sector that just support those inactive people and the private sector are just looking for the low-hanging fruit. And it's very much, you know, some great arguments on there around, not argument, but discussion around that, and how actually both the public and private sector are targeting various areas of the market. And I wonder, you know, from the experiences that you've had, you know, I guess traditionally there hasn't been a huge amount of collaboration between the public and private sector when it comes to sort of operators. Is that something you feel will be more important moving forward? Because obviously everybody has a different opportunity, but we're all going to have to observe the same sort of social distancing measures, and I'm sure we can learn. I mean, I'd welcome thoughts on that. Maybe Kenny, if you have a view on that from a sort of a wider safeguarding point of view, and obviously your work previously. Kenny, I'm not sure you've got your mute on or not.
Is that better? So as we come out of lockdown, we need to understand it will be a new normal. We will still probably, the rules aren't made up yet, but we'll still probably have to have social distancing for many months. We may have to have face coverings for many months. So those types of things will inhibit relationship building. And that's extraordinarily important for confidence building. We know that people come to sports for the connection, and when that connection is damaged either by facial coverings, etc., then that will have an impact on confidence, let alone some of the sports that you play. We know, for instance, that runners and energetic sports does throw things larger than 2 meters. The aerosol spread is 4 to 10 meters if someone's jogging, for instance. So those types of sports will have to be reviewed, and activities will have to be reviewed quite carefully as we look at research from across the globe.
Interesting, thank you. Sorry, Suzanne, did you have something to add to that?
No, I would just agree with that. I think there's a lot of planning and thinking on and lots of different scenario planning of, if this is the scenario, this is what it might look like, and all of those things that Kenny mentioned are definitely things that are in the mix, I think.
Right.
They have to be.
Yeah. Okay, so I've got 3 final questions just to give everyone a bit of context, and I've tried to kind of summarise from the discussions that were going on the chat. So one of the things that came up, people were really supportive and encouraged by the campaigns running at Sport England at the moment, and we've obviously got the hashtags, you know, stay and work out, all of that. There was a question around how join the movement, stay and work out, the kind of linking to other campaigns, Change for Life, and One You, and it can, I guess the world can be quite crowded, can't it, in terms of the different messages that people are getting. I don't know, Suzanne, is there thought around how this kind of, you know, if we talk about a customer journey from entering a premises or considering it, what does that look like from a campaign point of view?
From a campaign perspective, there's a few things. So one is we are in regular contact with Public Health England around the work that we're doing and the messaging and things that they're doing. So obviously there's been a strong push from Public Health England around Every Mind Matters, and particularly around supporting the mental wellbeing and resilience. So we are in conversation with them around the messaging, the interlinking of different campaigns. So you will see reference to This Girl Can and We're Undefeatable within the Join the Movement. So if you go into the workout at home section rather than the outside activities, there are particular sections targeting specific audiences, and so where that's relevant. So for instance, there are specific sections with content for older adults, for pregnancy, for disability and people with long-term conditions. So you'll see a direct link to We're Undefeatable. There are also links across to Change for Life, particularly around the content that's been developed with Disney for families. And whilst 1U isn't directly referenced, there are elements of links across to the Active 10 apps and things like that. So there are a lot of crossovers between the campaigns, and making sure also that the messaging on the guidance and how it plays out from a government level kind of to what you can do in your own home and outside of your own home is really clear and concise and joined up across all agencies. As I said, there's more content being added all the time. So this week there will be kind of more content linked, particularly to for people who are pregnant, who are postnatal, and support there. So there's constantly being things added, and we're working quite hard with the EMD around kind of the quality assurance and kind of what's going on.
Okay.
Of who we link to. I hope that helps. But if anybody's got any specific questions, feel free to contact me directly.
Brilliant, thank you. There was another question around, obviously we've talked today, Elaine, you've mentioned it, Kenny talks about sort of social inequalities, and it came through in your presentation as well, Suzanne, around kind of people with either long-term conditions, people with risk factors, and how to signpost them to the right and appropriate kinds of activities. So, you know, I know Jo Wicks is doing a lot of stuff, which is fantastic. There's lots of online things going on. My mother-in-law's 71, she's doing Jo Wicks, but you know, she's doing what she can do, and she's not, you know, leaping around and whatever. But how do we, as a sector, ensure that we're directing people to the right kind of activities? I think it was Ruth in the chat that was asking, you know, is there somewhere we can send people that, you know, if you have got a heart condition or, you know, where do you go for the right thing? So suddenly you're not put off because you're having to do a 25-minute hit that's 500 calories, like, and you've never done anything before.
Do you want to pick up the work that you're doing on that, and then I can follow up on that?
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Elaine. So there's a lot of work looking at that. So part of that is some of the stuff that I was just saying, actually, around the kind of the looking at the different audiences, the different content which is suitable. We, for our older adults, we worked with Demos to sort of nationalise a programme that they'd been working on, which is the 10 Today programme, working with the BBC. So there's more content for specific audiences kind of coming, I guess. Also working with the health charities, so through We're Undefeatable and more widely, there's a lot of work happening with the health charities on how they can support. And we're doing quite a lot of work recognising not everybody is digitally savvy or able to connect. So there's a lot of work happening with Public Health England and the National Centre for Sport of Exercise Medicine and other organisations on how we can get, I say, paper-based resources to those who are likely to be shielding and self-isolating and in need of that support the most, potentially to keep active. So that there's a number of different pieces of work that are happening, and also I'm aware that the Faculty of Sport and Exercise Medicine and the Chartered Society of Physiotherapy are also looking at kind of what resources might be needed for people who are recovering from COVID-19 and as they come out of hospital, so discharge, but also just if you're in the community and need some support. So looking at those aspects of the pandemic and what might be needed by people. So those are the things that I'm aware of, but I'm sure there's an awful lot more, and a number of local organisations have been doing a great job of providing physical activity sheets through the door to their members and doing regular weekly phone calls, and sports clubs have been playing their part in that. There's some great examples of how they've been bringing people together and keeping people active, and there's some good examples of that on the Club Matters website if anybody wants to take a look at that, and on our website, because I can't possibly name check all of the amazing work that's been happening, but we are trying to capture it and share it with people.
Yeah, I think that's the thing, isn't it? Trying to make it as easy as possible to signpost and then direct people, because there's so much out there.
And some of the disability partners in particular have been doing a great job of providing really dedicated support to their members.
I think, from my perspective, it is about getting the right people, the right opportunities in the right way, and so we can create the right opportunities, and that's what we're doing with the water wellbeing is get that model right, get the opportunities right, and create the right environment for individuals. The bit that a lot of pools struggle with is then engaging and attracting individuals in, because they're often quite tight on resources, and that outreach resource that used to happen in a lot of places has probably gone. So we've been spending quite a lot of time trying to create those links for them. So we've been working with some of the charities to try and do that. We've done some developed some peer support training with Versus Arthritis, so that, because often individuals want somebody like them who's been through what they've been through to understand their needs and help them along the way. So I think that's a vital part of it. And then the last part really is how do we get that pathway right? So if I go in and I see a health professional, am I reassured that that person will recommend physical activity for me in the first instance and understand that, but then give me an idea of where is a good place for me to go to get that opportunity? And I know that there's some work being done around that, but we're really keen to try and work more with bodies that would enable us to sort of signpost people to the pool. And there is a massive opportunity with social prescribing and the link workers. And I think physical activity is going to be one of the core pillars of those link workers. So those people will be supporting individuals who are vulnerable, are at risk, and may have some challenges in their life. And they will be, hopefully, we will be in a position to be able to provide them with where best to send those clients to get them that support. So I think there's lots of opportunities there to make it happen.
Okay, and I suppose the final sort of question, it's not really been picked up yet, but there is a real dilemma, isn't there? If we're thinking of, I mean, people can obviously exercise for free outside, and that's amazing, and we'll obviously encourage people to do just that. But for people that are needing to pay for activities, how do, with social distancing, I envisage happening for a significant period of time, how do we create a balance where it's affordable for the user, but it also creates a business plan for the facility operator? I can foresee an absolute crisis for the sector in terms of, you know, if you can only have so many people in a pool at any one time, or so many people in a changing room, or so many people near a pitch, because you have to keep, you know, what does, has there been any thinking around that? I know obviously Sport England announced a whole range of funding opportunities that people can potentially try to access to support them. Longer term, this could go on for a long time. Is there any thinking around that?
I mean, I think there's a couple of things that we need to explore further and use. We know that, you know, people can use personal care budgets, but they're not aware often of that. And there was some work done by Disability Rights UK who did some research looking at that. And often it was the people that advised those individuals weren't giving them that advice that actually they could use their care budgets to pay for physical activity opportunities. So there's some of that might be part of it. I mean, I would love to be in a world where we have really, really pegged the case on the benefits for patients for the health service, from the health service perspective. So the health economic side of this, we've got a long way to go for that. We know that the health service is under enormous pressure, and that will continue, and it's probably going to continue for a long time. And we know that there were started to have discussions about integrated care and various other things across local authorities, and health services are opening up the discussion around how do we help people's health and well-being, get rid of some of the barriers across the sectors that we have, but how do we show also that can, if in the short term, we used to think about the prevention agenda, thinking, oh, well, this is great, we'll save the health service money 10, 20 years down the line. That luxury's gone. It's about how do we actually show that we can do something to support the health service that may reduce their costs, may support them, do things in a different way that might be more efficient. We just don't know. But we have a massive opportunity to show that. We can show that we can provide support and therapies to a certain degree. I mean, I know there's an argument over whether it's therapy, whether it's physical activity, but those lines are getting more and more blurred over time, but we can help a vast majority of people that may be difficult for the health service to do in the time that they would like to. So I think there's some areas there that really need further investigation.
Okay, I'm going to take that opportunity to just say a massive thank you. Elaine and Suzanne and Kenny has had to leave us. Thank you to Y Sports for hosting a fantastic, like really informative webinar. I've got a lot from it. I know that people online have got a lot from it. There's been some fantastic conversation going on. As I said at the start, Y Sports can be hosting a series of these, and today's conversation has given me loads of food for thought in terms of different topics that are of interest to people. I think workforce being one, facilities and long-term business plans clearly another. There's a whole range. My head is absolutely bursting with ideas right now. For people that want to revisit the webinar, you'll be able to run through it in real time. It will be saved. All the slides are available on PDF. You can download them. Obviously, speakers have put links into the chat so you can connect. If anyone's got any questions, then please get in touch with Y Sports on social media, and we'll try and signpost you to the right answers. Yeah, just leave me to say a massive thank you to everybody. I wish you well, stay safe, and importantly, keep moving. And we'll see you again for the next webinar series soon. Well, thank you very much.